This is a message that has been on my heart for a few months now. I recently completed an amazing journey that not only matured the message in my mind, but it made it pretty pointed that it was my responsibility to share it. There is a sickness that is growing among us. I don't know how many years, a lot of years now. But and it's largely driven by population density, which is an inescapable fact of life. But the sickness is a lack of connection, a lack of human intuition. It drives us out of our hearts and into our minds. And we're in an era that I don't think is going to stop, where we are bombarded with information warfare. I don't know if it's intentional or deliberate or simply a factor of how things are. And to me, it doesn't really matter. A lot of people say social media is the problem. Social media connects us in powerful and fundamental ways. Much of the value of my life is built on top of the connectedness and the relationships that have come from my participation with this wonderful web of connectedness. But at the same time, there's a lot of information warfare that exists within that web that just really drives this sickness. How does it manifest itself? Well, I'm going to speak, perhaps regionally or continentally. Everybody knows that there are, roughly speaking, two camps in America today, and that's a big problem. That's a big problem because we need to repair our soul. We need to repair our national soul, and we actually need both of these groups of people. Those of you who are driven by compassion, who perhaps think of yourself as social justice warriors, if you're angry, you have lost your power. Your power is your compassion. And if you've been pushed into a place where you're responding out of fear and out of anger, you've lost your moral mandate. You cannot fight disconnection with fear and anger. You can only fight disconnection with connection and compassion. And you look at your neighbors and you think of them as the enemy. And these are people who, their only crime, other than the humanity that afflicts us all, their only crime is that they understand the nature of the world in a way that you don't, and to a certain extent it has hardened their hearts. These are not evil people. These are people who understand that evil stalks the earth in the form of predation, in the form of government monstrosity. But when you fall into anger with these people, they have hard hearts, and they're hardwired to respond to aggression with aggression. And if you find yourself in a space of anger, in a space of fear, and you're not connecting with these people, your neighbors, you've already lost. You've lost what you have. And on the other side, the people who probably are more my people, and I'll speak even to a certain subset of those people. If you're somebody who goes armed every day, as I do, if you're somebody who has a good fighting rifle at home and all of the necessary support gear and training to use that, it's natural to think of these other folks as an enemy, because you understand the world in a way that they don't. But here's the thing: their only crime, other than the humanity that afflicts us all, is that their hearts are bigger than the world as it is. And you need that. They remember something that you've forgotten along the way. We understand that the right to self-determination is a basic human right. It's not granted by our Constitution. It exists separately from it. And every human being on the planet has a right to self-determination, and in fact the possession of power to ensure that self-determination. But here's the thing: when you take up that weapon, which fundamentally means that you have accepted the responsibility of life and death, that is not just a right. You now have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to be your brother's keeper. That level of power, without a strong connection to your heart, it is amoral. It has no purpose. So it is absolutely fundamental that if you are going to choose to maintain that power, you must also bear the responsibility of deliberately connecting to your heart, deliberately connecting to your neighbors whose hearts are bigger than yours, and proceeding from that standpoint. You have the power, you also have the responsibility. The thing about connection is, this is something that as humans, we all have powerful capacity for connected intuition. The problem is that most of us live in areas of population density where we simply must shut that down because we are bombarded with too much information for our brains to process, information for our senses to process, and so we shut down and disconnect from the world around us, and that is the sickness, and it is insidious. And the only way to overcome that is to be mindful of forming connections. And there are some ways that you can do this. For me, throughout my life, a very significant one has been time in the backcountry. I'm here at almost 12,000 feet in the mountains in an alpine basin, and it's a blessing to be here, of course, but what I'm about to talk about you can find in the woodlot behind your house in an urban area. When we go independently into these sorts of environments, we have an aptitude to connect with what's going on, but you have to be mindful about it. Oh, Tingleshka, you're so still and quiet. I felt your presence and I was looking, but even so, I nearly stepped on you. Oh boy. Your mother will be back. And if not, you're returning from the place that you just came from. Either way, you're going to be all right. All is possible. This is all a very basic human capability, but we live in a world where we have to shut off our intuitive abilities just to exist, and B, we're pushed into this mind space every single day by our connection to social media, and we end up living in our minds instead of in our hearts. So go out into areas like this and be absolutely mindful of cultivating your connectedness and your intuition, your ability to connect with your neighbors, your ability to connect with the world. This is something that is more powerful than any political statement. It's more powerful than protest marches. The way out of where we are is a healing of our soul and building connections with our neighbors. It's not fighting, it's not arguments, it's not intellectual, it's not mental. It requires that all of us, no matter what we think our political stance is, it requires that we all open our hearts and we all be mindful about connectedness. And we're mindful of, the person who perhaps we would have been upset with. There's a reason they're doing what they're doing. Open your heart, understand why people do things, and cultivate that very human capability mindfully and deliberately. There are some other ways to do it. Find sacred places. There are certainly churches church buildings where, by dint of generations of mindfulness, they are truly sacred places. Reach out to your Creator. It doesn't matter if you believe in your Creator, because your Creator believes in you. Reach out and attempt to open your heart in that way. Something else that is part of my weekly practice and is super important to me is martial arts, but done properly, because it forces a connection and it forces a certain kind of physical interaction with your training brothers and sisters. And if you're mindful about it, you will develop in how you intuit others and in how you position yourself relative to the world around you. There are people who through art find connectedness, but there's probably 100 different ways, but it starts with opening up your heart, understanding that you are dealing with a sickness, and opening your heart to the healing of that sickness. And that healing comes from connectedness. It's absolutely fundamental, absolutely important, and it is something that every single one of us has the ability to do. So that is my prayer for this country, for my people, and really for all people.